Sir, you're live on YouTube now.
Yeah, you give us the cue.
Yeah, sir, we are live on the YouTube. You can go on.
Can I start?
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Hyderabad Literary Festival, to this session with Kishwar Desai in conversation with Sathya Saran. And Kishwar Desai, ladies and gentlemen, is a well-known writer of both fiction and non-fiction, and award-winning writer. Her first novel, Witness the Night, won the Costa First Novel Award in the UK. And then, of course, she followed it up with Origins of Love and Sea of Innocence. And then, interestingly, the trilogy has since been optioned for a web series. And her nonfiction books include, a book on Jallianwala Bagh, and then she wrote several books on Hindi films. Earlier she wrote a book on on Manto. And the latest book, which we are going to discuss this afternoon, is The Longest Case, The Life and Times of Devika Rani. And she has a book on Nargis and Sunil Dutt. And this is her latest book on film personalities. So this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Kishwar Desai is going to be in conversation with Sathya Saran. Sathya Saran, as many of you know already, this morning we had a session with her. But there she was the author, and here she is going to be the moderator. And Sathya, of course, is well known for her editorship at Femina, and she has written several biographies herself. And the biography that we featured this morning was the biography on Hariprasad Chaurasia. So welcome to HLF, both Kishwar and Sathya. Thank you very much, and we look forward to this session. I apologize for the slight delay in starting this. What we will do is that we will reduce the question answers at the end by 5 minutes to compensate for this. And so I'll disappear now from the screen, and I'll come back in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the session. So thank you very much, and welcome once again to HLF.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So here we are on. I can't see Kishwar, but can you hear me? I can't see Kishwar.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Good. So Kishwar,
yes, ma'am, we can hear you. We can see you good.
Great. So I've started off. It's delightful to be chatting with you. I mean, we go back a long way. Thank you. I've read your book. I've in fact done a review which hasn't appeared. And I must say that I was fascinated absolutely by the amount of information that you have managed to pack between those pages. And as you say in your intro, it was a very long road of research, many years. Tell us a little about your research.
Thank you, Sathya, and thank you to the HLF for inviting me to talk about my new book, which is The Longest Case, The Life and Times of Devika Rani. So as you said, there is a lot of research which has gone into this book. Sathya, the main reason was that when I was looking at the work of Devika and Himanshu, and this was at the National Film Archives many, many years ago, because I just wanted to look at the early Indian cinema and what were the influences on it. So now I'm talking about the 1920s, 30s, 40s. And I realized that there was a huge amount of globalization of early Indian cinema which had taken place, led by Devika Rani's first husband, Himanshu Rai, who had made some astonishing films, beautifully shot like The Light of Asia, Shiraz, and so on, for which he had an international team, of Germans and British people working for him. Now, this has not been sufficiently recognized in this country. And then later on, of course, when he met Devika, he was like fascinated by this woman who was the great grandniece
of Tagore.
Yes. And he felt that she was such a beauty, and kind of it surprised him that nobody had, picked on her before, but she was a very young girl at that time. Now, when I started looking at all this information at the film archives, which was around, as I said, 15 years back, I found very little to go by. In fact, even Himanshu himself had not really put down much. There were lots of scattered articles and film reviews and, things like that, which are available. But there was nothing which was of any substantial nature. So, me with my journalistic and television background, I got immediately fascinated by this couple and then decided that there has to be some way that I can actually begin to gather all this information. So the first thing I did was I collected everything that I could find at the National Film Archives. And then, like a real journalist, went around talking to people, trying to investigate. And ultimately, it was through people, through their own personal connections, and also through the Roerich Museum in New York. I mean, this story took me all over the world, to different people because Devika and Himanshu in their own way were extremely well known. And then, as you know, she married Roerich, Sviatoslav Roerich, also a very well known individual in his own right. And so this meant that there were always hundreds of people who, once they knew I was writing about her, started coming to me. And it also meant that I accumulated 2 suitcases full of material. It was like more than you can imagine. But the only problem was, Satya, I had collected so much information that I needed to have time to sort of piece it together. It was a jigsaw puzzle because there was nothing, no ready-made biography, autobiography, even a short write-up that I could go by. So I had to create my own timeline. I had to use material that they had left scattered all over the place. And some of it, fortunately for me, was a personal correspondence which she had written to Sviatoslav.
I'm very curious. How did you find that? How did you stumble on it?
There it was. When you are like fascinated and passionate, Satya, always believe that the material will come to you. And it wasn't easy because there were lots of people who did have material, who could have just given it to me because it was ready-made. But unfortunately for me, they all wanted large amounts of money. So I found that, for a struggling writer, who's writing a book, to be asked to pay $1 million or to be given, so that was very, very sad for me because this was material that belonged to Devika. And in a sense, is a heritage of our country. And then for families and people to, instead of giving it away to a museum or giving it away to a writer for me, or at least allowing access, were actually demanding money for it. But I didn't give up. And at the end of it, I managed to get hold of, from here and there and all over the place, managed to get hold of that material. So there are too many sources to name here, but I would just say that it was astonishing that I think I was guided by Devika, to be honest, because she was such an amazing person and she deserved a biography of hers.
Absolutely. But that leads me to my next question. That if you have 2 suitcases full of material, how do you know what to keep? And how did you spin that yarn that goes through your book and holds it all together without getting scattered?
Well, this is where you and I have both been journalists, and we know that whether you're writing a short story or you're writing fiction or non-fiction or whatever, or even a television program, every story needs a start, a beginning, and an end. And I think we have been trained very well in that. And I've had more than 25, 30 years of journalism, both on the, writing in print as well as television. So I think what happens is that when we start examining, and this was really like a jigsaw puzzle, I had to sit with all and this is where the COVID was very, very crucial, because I needed to take out all those documents from the suitcases and I needed to spread them out all over the house. So every available space, all the sofas, all the beds, everything, chairs, everything was just covered with paper, while I went around putting them in order, because everything had to be slotted, everything had to be fitted in. And then a story, a narrative began to emerge that this is how things began to happen. Had it not been for the lockdown, I don't know whether this book would have got written. So I'm very fortunate it was and there was no jharu pocha. there was no dusting for months because our woman never came. And I must say, I have a very patient family. We come from a family of writers. My husband is a writer. My daughter's also been writing books. So I think everybody who was at home at that time was very, very kind to me and let me make this big mess all over the house. It was very helpful because that's how the book got pieced together.
It's a little bit like when you see in these crime series, when they're trying to solve a crime, they put everything up on the board and they start drawing lines.
Yeah,
I see
literally, because Sathya, a lot of the people that were mentioned also in the notes in the papers, it's kind of so astonishing. Suddenly the name of Ashok Kumar will jump up. In a meeting, he's attending a meeting of Bombay Talkies. He's giving in his resignation, things like that. So it became so fascinating. Yeah. So, so it was like, okay, so this happened at this time. So this must have preceded it. And I think there is where maybe the years of training and being able to work, in isolation. I think that is the other thing that helps. Because all writers are trained to work in isolation. We don't get easily distracted. So I would start from 8 in the morning and carry on till 1 or 2, just figuring out what it was really hard work. It was very hard work. This is the book I worked the hardest on because there was very little to go by. There were other biographies that I could refer to, but they could only give me short insights, here and there, that this is what it must have been. Rest of it, I had to piece together.
But you've done a great job.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about the structure. Mm-hmm. See, you have straight narrative, which takes the chronology and the history of your subject forward, of the era, of the times, whatever's been happening, how Himanshu made his films. And then you have these segments where people are talking. Devika is talking, the first meeting with Himanshu, how it went. So you've given them dialogues. What made you do this juxtaposition?
I felt that a lot of Indian cinema, we are a country that is mad about cinema. We have such a great love and fixation for it. And yet the historical side of it is often forgotten by many of us who are readers of fiction mainly, and we are also readers in a sense that we do read non-fiction, but somehow cinema is not usually considered worthy enough of serious attention. So I was trying to marry the two. I had excellent documentation that I wanted the person who's not necessarily drawn to Indian cinema, who might look at it from its historical and archival value. And I also wanted to target those people who read books like a narrative, like just a romance, like a story. And this woman had a very romantic life. Her first husband was madly in love with her. Of course, they had a lot of trouble and he physically abused her and things like that also. But then another man came along and fell in love with her. And there were many other men like that as well. But in between, she was an excellent actress. And there were many, many things which I could document and put out there as historical research, as academic research. So I was trying to actually look at how to bring in a larger audience into looking at Indian cinema as something which has shaped us all, which has given us a foundation for the kind of cinema that we watch today and which influences us still today. And let us not forget the early heroes. The people who were out there doing global cinema. Today, if somebody screens a film in London, the whole press goes crazy. But, in 1933, Karma, which is Devika Rani's first film, made its debut off Oxford Street at Marble Arch Theatre. And everybody turned out, 400 lords, ladies, everybody turns out to see it. So can you imagine, how can we forget that our cinema was capable of attracting that kind of attention, that kind of investment? But I wanted also I introduced the dialogues because I felt that people who are reading it can also get a sense, a feel. And Sathya, if you look at, Hilary Mantel and you look at other writers, I'm not comparing myself to her, but I'm just saying, if you look at other writers of this period, they are dealing with history with a certain dramatic value, which then expands the study and understanding of history. So I was just trying to try that, yes.
Right. Well, I've done it myself in SD Burman,
yes.
which you read. Anyway,
Yes.
but I wanted to say that, you know, one had heard of Devika. I've met Devika Rani very briefly by accident, but Himanshu was someone who used to fascinate me as someone who had done, you know, amazing work in cinema. But you make him come alive, you know, in a very different aspect as a charmer who used his charm to take forward his passion for cinema. Where did you get this all this material from? Because a lot of it is private.
Yes, as I said right in the beginning of the book, you know, that there was a lot to do with Devika's own attempts to keep her, you know, all her archives safe, and she did keep. Some of them were in the Rorick Museum in New York. Some of them were with various people, as I said, too numerous to name, who came forward to help me without any monetary compensation. So, you know, I decided that this woman, because she was so careful about whatever she, you know, she even kept the anonymous letters. These days when actresses get trolled, you know, they get upset and they're crying and all that. But Devika was getting trolled in 1945 because she wanted to marry Svetoslav, and people were threatening all kinds of things. They were going to burn down Bombay talkies. They were abusing her. But she actually very nicely preserved all those letters, because I think she was a great archivist. She actually did believe that what they did was very historical at Bombay Talkies. Yes. And I think this was where her own efforts, and also Svetoslav himself, he always said that, look, you do not know as of now the importance of what we are doing. And of course, he came from a family, as you know, the Roricks, with their spiritual and their theosophical interests, both in Manali and Nagar, and then also in Bangalore when they later shifted there. These were areas where he was very interested. He wanted to preserve all their experimentations and whatever they were doing. And he wanted Devika to do the same thing, because he actually respected her work. You know, this was, Sathya, for me, very important. Because before she met Svetoslav, you know, for a woman, she needs to be respected. And I think before she met Svetoslav, she was doing her work, but she, as she herself says in her letters, was like a machine. This was her mechanical life. She would go to the studio at 8 in the morning, start working, acting, grooming other people, dancing. I mean, she sometimes would work so hard that she would actually faint. You know, she would just, you know, all kinds of things were happening to her. But she was not getting, and she was called an adulteress. She did run away. She had an affair with somebody, etc. But
don't take away all my questions from me.
Sorry, but Svetoslav was not interested in that. He actually respected her work. And even when she told him that, you know, one of the things I did was put on makeup on old ladies in Bond Street, he actually wrote, I mean, she was about 17 years old and she was trying to earn some money. And you must remember, she comes from the Tagore family, but she's a highly independent woman. She does not want to get money from anybody. She wants to earn her own money. She's very stubborn about this. And he actually does tell her that, look, I respect you for whatever you have done. It doesn't matter. I think a woman who stands on her own feet, that is very important. So Svetoslav was also responsible for all the documentation that you see here in the book.
Wow, okay, that's lovely. Well, your book is almost as much a story of the Bombay Talkies saga, you know, the entire, which is why it's extremely valuable, because it's cinematic history. So tell us, how necessary did you feel to invest so much time and effort into explaining the entire chronology and the ups and downs and the skirmishes and the battles and the politics, and of course the highs that Bombay Talkies achieved? How necessary was it?
You know, I felt that this was really Devika's story. The narrative is largely, from my perspective, about her. It is how she is initially groomed by Himanshu, and therefore I had to give Himanshu's background and why he was so important for early Indian cinema. They were in a partnership. when they set up Bombay Talkies. And this for me was very important as an acknowledgement of her contribution. You know, she actually sold all her jewelry, all her nice clothes as a young girl. She was barely in her 20s, newly married, and they're in Germany. And she said, you know, we starved. We sometimes had nothing to eat, but they were so passionate about making cinema, and they were learning at that time in the German studios. So she says, like, I had only one pair of stockings and I only used to wear them when I used to go out. Otherwise I'd walk around barefoot. But Himanshu had to be properly dressed because he was a guy who would go out and represent us. So, you know, she made a lot of sacrifices, and she does say that whatever money I had, it was all gone because it was all given to Bombay Talkies. Bombay Talkies was their joint production and a joint studio they set up jointly. But Sathya, it is very sad that her contribution is never recognized, because throughout, if you read contemporary narratives, and I've quoted also from Manto and so on, she's considered to be, you know, the kind of a wanton woman. She's very cold. She's very this. She's very that. But you know, she was most of the time the only woman who was attending formal meetings, only woman in the board meetings, and so she had to be, you know, purer than pure, or at least give that thing of being a little aloof from everybody. They had 400 employees in Bombay Talkies, and she and her husband had to groom them, look after them. So the point is that I felt the story of Bombay Talkies was in many ways her story, and it was not recognized as being her story. Had she not been there, Sathya, doing those early films, you know, like Jeevan Naya, Chut Kanya, I mean, you name them, it is her face, her glowing, gorgeous, beautiful face that people remember. And bringing in the investment, very, very important, because Bombay Talkies was on the stock market, people were buying shares in it, and she was very crucial to all of that, because she and her husband decided very early that they needed to bring educated people into cinema. Otherwise, people would not invest. You know, people were not prepared to invest in cinema because it was all, they used to say, I'm sorry to use the word, the wives and so on. Nothing against all of that, but this was their thinking. And it worked because the Parsis came forward to invest. The British were very, very helpful. And of course, you know, Setalvad, Chamanlal Setalvad, the famous lawyer, extremely wealthy, was their chairperson. Who better than that? Who better than that to bring respectability? And a lot of it was to do with Devika, because she was charming. She looked, she was from the Tagore background. She looked like someone you could invest your money in, because she was somebody who was truly outstanding compared to all the other women and actresses at that time.
Right, right. But you have a pretty long episode about her elopement with Nazam-ul Hussain. I hope I'm getting his name right. Yes. And you've used that episode more than any other to bring out the patriarchy, you know, in the industry at that time. Tell our audience a little about that.
Yeah. So, you know, what happens is that, as you see in the early part of the book, Himanshu is having a lot of affairs all the time. But his friends and all the men he works with are very forgiving. They overlook it because that is Himanshu. However, Devika goes through her own extremely bad patch when she comes into Bombay Talkies. Himanshu is extremely busy now, also raising money, etc. She's very busy in her own way, working as an actress. She was the only actress. She was acting in 3 films a year for Bombay Talkies. It was like a non-stop kind of, treadmill that she was on at that time. And she had no confidant. So she meets up with Najamul Hussain, who is her co-star, extremely handsome. I mean, I have seen those films, and I can vouch for the fact that he was probably the best looking actor, and somehow something very nice about him. This is also the time when Himanshu has already started behaving badly with Devika. He was probably on the edge of a nervous breakdown because believe me, there was a lot of pressure on producers at that time. And we see it later on, how what happens with Guru Dutt, what happens with Gyan Mukherjee, and so on. So he was not the first person to go under. Cinema is extremely demanding, but he had started taking it out on Devika. And I think I needed to spend time there talking about her personal travails and the pain. And, like he would hit her till she would drop, and he would hit her with a thick script, and she would faint. And again, she would be revived, and she said, I would hold my head high and I would go back to work. She would have malaria, 103, 104 temperature. Himanshu would force her to go and work because he probably felt as a producer, he had no option. He couldn't let his wife because, production was more important than her illness. So, she went through all of this and ultimately ran away with Najmul Hussain. And I think she's persuaded, of course, to come back with under new I think there's a negotiation which takes place at that point, which I've referred to, and which the family also told me later on that it was, he had wanted to divorce her, but he had also wanted to bring about adultery charges against Najmul Hussain, which was pretty serious in those days. But ultimately they patch up and she comes back to Bombay Talkies. Now the same men who had forgiven every bit of philandering which Himanshu did and probably continued to do, have a very different attitude when Devika comes back. I mean, as I said, they call her an adulteress. She's called all kinds of names. And she's also treated extremely badly. But to her, she's a survivor. She is very shrewd, and she also understands as long as she delivers hits upon hits, nobody can touch her. Yes. And this is what she does. She is the star of every film that subsequently continues to come out of Bombay Talkies. And this is what makes her so successful. So nobody can throw her out, nobody can touch her. And Himanshu, contrary to being, this cuckolded husband who would probably be, very angry, but he continues to be angry because he's on a downward spiral, probably having a nervous breakdown, but he becomes exceedingly dependent on her. So, she manages to battle the patriarchy. It teaches her a very important lesson, Sathya. And as you know in the book, this is what enables her to survive the long years, the 5 years that she somehow runs Bombay Talkies after Himanshu's death, which are very, very difficult years. But she keeps on saying that everything I have gone through, she, says that I made this pact with God, that everything that I've gone through, all the beatings, all the scars, everywhere that I have been abused, I'm hoping that at the end of it, he will give me a reward. And she considered Svetoslav her reward.
Reward, yes. No, but I think it's so important that a woman wrote this book, because people may call it a feminist point of view. They like to beat us with that. But the fact is that somebody had to recognize her contribution at every stage, right from the beginning, from getting in, by getting into agreeing to act in cinema so that other women from respectable families could come in. From that stage right to the end of running the studio after her husband dies, which is an impossible feat even today, I think, for a woman to head a studio. I don't know how many women head studios, even today in the industry in India. So I think, but what I found a bit disturbing while I was reading was that some icons whom you look up to and I look up to were upturned. Manto for one, Ashok Kumar for another. I mean, they came through as not icons, but human beings capable of misreading somebody or, imposing their views on a reader or on their co-stars, as in Ashok Kumar's case. He rebels against her. So I think from being a doe-eyed admirer of Devika Rani to go into someone who stands against her and tries to create a parallel structure in the studio was a little disturbing. But how did you deal with that? Were you equally disturbed when you found these things out?
No, Satya, I wasn't, because as you know, you've been writing biographies. And I think all biographies only come alive when the character, including Devika, has shades of gray. You know, they're not all good, they're not all bad, they are all creatures of circumstance. And especially cinema is all about survival. It's all about hail to the rising sun, you know, because nobody wants to be left behind. Nobody wants to be seen as someone who was not an insider. Everybody wants to be an insider. Nobody wants to be an outsider. In Devika's case, it was far more difficult because she was the only woman who was actually at the head. You know, I mean, sometimes she would attend meetings. I've counted the number of people. There are 50 men, and she's the only woman there in the meeting. And yet she holds her own. I've quoted examples how she actually manages to quell rebellions against her in those meetings. And she did it all properly. She did it at the board meeting. She spoke up. Everything, Satya, this is the other thing which I found. Everything is documented.
About board. And also
yes.
about...
Yes, so everything is, there's a vote that is held, and that is how motions are carried through. So it's not like when she takes over Bombay Talkies, she does it by force. She does it by getting hold of enough number of votes and getting her point of view across. And that's how she becomes the controller of productions and the sole manager of Bombay Talkies. But I think regarding the others, Manto has been my hero. You know, I've written about him, I've written a play about him. But in this case, because I could see the contrary kind of, things which were coming out, what he was writing in this very thinly veiled story, which I've quoted about Latika Rani and, you know, what she is, and it's all about Devika. And her own letters of that period are reflecting a different kind of pain and, you know, what she's going through and what she's hiding from the world, which obviously people from Manto did not know, people like Manto did not know, that Himanshu was beating her and abusing her. And she was actually going through a lot of pain herself. And she had too much dignity. This is something, again, she had decided at the age of, I think, 11 or 12, it's in one of her letters in the book, that she said, no, I'm always going to hold my head high. I'm never going to allow my dignity to be affected by whatever's, I'm never going to cry in front of the world. I'm never going to ask anyone for help. So, you know, this was her. And so she bears up with all of that. That's why the book is very important, I feel. You said feminist. Yes, I believe it is feminist, but I believe it is also important for us to recognize that there were women in Indian cinema who were not victims, who did not fall prey to alcoholism and always, and you know, fall apart and things like that, who took it on their chin and plotted and planned, just like any man would, to get back into control. So
and knew how to handle money. And knew how to handle money. I mean, that was very important. You know, to handle people is one thing, but to be able to handle a board meeting, to be able to handle the shares and to know when to sell what. I mean, I don't think even I can do it. You know.
All of that was very important. I think Ashok Kumar, in fact, doesn't actually, in my mind, come out too badly, but because he belongs to a particular group, which is led by Sathya Saran Mukherjee, who's actually a very important person in his own right in the history of Indian cinema. But he is the one who has been, he thinks he's the rightful heir to Himanshu Rai. So after Himanshu dies, he takes on Devika. So because this is a whole group, so I think people like Ashok Kumar, Datta Rampai, so many others just move on to that side. It's not like they, and so the things which are repeated about her are repeated very often by many of them, you know. But it's, I don't think Ashok Kumar comes out to bed. Neither do the other people. It's just that they are misogynistic. You know, I did find that there is a lot of patriarchy. And I was surprised to see the amount of patriarchal comments that even Manto was capable of making about.
I was shocked, actually. Tell me about her letters. I mean, you have used them in the book to take the narrative forward. They are like catalysts at every point. So you chose them. They are not always chronological, right?
No.
And you had to edit them quite a lot. Because she is a very effusive writer.
Her letters often run into like 20. She was very passionate. She was writing to Svetoslav when she was completely in love with him. So the letters often are, you know, it's about a lot of things, and I'm planning to publish them now separately as, you know,
the letters
along with so that people can read them, in their entirety. But for the book, I felt it was important to quote her as much as possible, to quote her voice. As I said, Indian cinema lacks too many female voices. And I think especially somebody like her who had the opportunity to look at it from so many different perspectives. Let's not forget, even though she did not make much of it, but she was also from the elite. She was very much, and she was absorbed very easily into the elite of Bombay at that point, even after Himanshu's death. And before that, she works at Sathya. She is a workaholic. This woman rarely takes a holiday. She's there at the studio from 8 in the morning till about 6 or 7 in the evening. She literally has no life, and they live in Malad. Of course, now Malad is not so far away, but in those days, even in a car, it would take her and she had to go and attend the meetings, which are in ready money mansions in Bombay. So, so things like that. So, but she was a complete workaholic. She was loyal to Bombay talkies till the very end. She tried to do her best, tried to make sure that the studio kept running, but she would not give it up. This was the one thing she would not do, just so easily, to people who were out to malign her and to take it away from her. I mean, that was a point she had to prove.
Actually, when in her last days, when we used to read in the newspapers what was happening with her, and she was being held hostage by the person who was looking after her, we read all these stories. Many of the stories portrayed her as not being all there, a mad old woman who has seen her best days behind her. I'm glad you put that into perspective.
Yes. I think she was an extremely intelligent woman. There is no doubt about it. She was extremely bright. She actually set up two very viable institutions. One, of course, was Bombay Talkies.
Yes.
And the other one was the estate in Tataguni, where they used to make this linole oil, which goes into the making of all these cosmetics, which is used there. And she was a big, big support to Svetoslav. He would probably have fallen apart. So unfortunately, in her life, she had to support. She was actually the muse for two men. It's Himanshu, whom she probably married thinking, oh, he's 16 years older, he'd look after her, etc., etc. Alas, that image fell apart very quickly. And with Svetoslav as well, though he was very kind, very loving, very respectful, but once his family scattered and died, then he became very dependent. Yes, he became very dependent on Devika. And I think that is something which I wanted to bring out, that she was actually a very strong woman. But like all strong women, she also wanted something. And I think that quotation from Tara Ali Beg right at the end of the book is very poignant, where she says that Tara Ali Beg goes to meet Devika at Tataguni, and she says she's looking at her as though something was still missing in her life, and she was still looking for something, and possibly Devika was probably capable of achieving a lot more. But like many women, she decided to become the support of the men that she loved. Right. And I think that's also something which comes out in this book, the very romantic story. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't want it to be judgmental. These were her choices. But I think she was capable of much more than ultimately she managed to do.
Yes, but she did a lot.
She did a lot, yeah.
Two more questions, actually. One is your prologue, which is in a very different tone and mood from the rest of the book. I want to know what is the thought behind that, making it different, making it so internalized, talking about their lovemaking. I mean, where I didn't see it fit with the rest of the book somehow. That's the only thing which
you mean with Svetoslav, the first chapter of the book? Yeah. So this is when she's in Bombay Talkies. The thing with Devika was the expanse of her life was so great, and it covered so many different aspects. So I start with, of course, the first actual beginning of the book is when her film Karma gets released. And that's a very, very high point. And then the next chapter, which you're talking about, immediately after that is when she's leaving. When she's leaving Bombay Talkies, and she's on the edge of
Yeah.
And she gets those anonymous letters and things. So I wanted to start with the two contrasts. Here she is at the high and, they're going to change the whole world. And the next chapter, bang, is about her wanting to leave Bombay Talkies. And a whole lot of things have happened. And that Himanshu, I wanted the reader to be aware that Himanshu, I quote from that letter directly in which she says how much he used to beat her and things like that. Because, that very romantic opening, and then the next one you realize, oh my God, maybe things were not as great as everybody made them out to be. And there was a darker side. And I hope
giving the bigger
would,
picture.
Yes. And I thought that would bring to the reader the gamut of her life, starting from there, a high point, going to when she's leaving and the reasons why she's leaving. And I think I wanted the reader to understand this woman's life is not a cakewalk. She had to go through a lot in order to reach this point where she actually is leaving Bombay Talkies forever.
Vijay, do I have one last question is, how do you think people will take to a book that's 440 pages?
Well, I think the good thing about a book that is 440 pages is that people can dip in and out of it. They don't have to read it in one go. They can read chapters that interest them, chapters that they are interested in, or information. But I largely wrote it also because I needed to commend her work to the world. I needed people to understand her and Himanshu's contribution better. And I also needed to put on record some very, very important documents, which I think people did not know about till this book has come out. And I even have things like the first letter which Prithvi Raj Kapoor writes to Devika, introducing his son, Ranbir Raj Kapoor.
That's so sweet.
And I didn't know that Raj Kapoor's first name was Ranbir. And someone told me, I don't think Ranbir knows it either. So it was Ranbir Raj Kapoor he introduces, and then the first letter of introduction, which is sent to introduce Dilip Kumar to her as Yusuf Khan. And so, and then Madan Mohan is writing to her. And so these very important documents, I do believe will help and serve the cause of Indian cinema. The rest of it, well, I hope people like it. So far, the reviews have been very, very good, and God has been kind. It's doing well. I do hope more people will read it.
No, and I think it's a very important chronicle. It's history.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sathya. Coming from you, that sounds really lovely.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Oh, what an engaging session. And the comments that I'm getting in the chat box, all of them are highlighting this one particular point. Is one, what a passionate writer, particularly somebody who has brought out with such engagement the dignity and the importance of a wonderful woman in Hindi film history. So that's the running comment from everybody there. There are just a couple of questions. Actually, one question that I had was. One, of course, is a very obvious question. The entire story of Devika Rani that you just narrated is so engaging that it almost reads like another film.
Yes.
Right. And in these days where biopics are the flavor of the season, do you see this coming out again as a film?
Well, yes, I've already had around 6 people getting in touch, 6 different production houses, both national and international. So let's see. Like with everybody else, we don't know. These are very complicated things. So I have an agent who's dealing with it. And he's very excited about the whole prospect of this becoming either a film or a web series. And almost every day I'm getting calls. So,
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank
Wonderful.
you.
And that's why the film, the actors of an earlier era, whether it is Devika Rani, whether it is Nadira, whether it is Helen, their lives are so colorful. Colorful. I mean, very nuanced, many layered, and compared to that, I think today's actors, lives are a little flat, if I were to say that.
Yeah.
Everything is worked out.
It's very interesting that you should say that, because I was just talking to my parents yesterday. My dad is 97, my mom is 87, and they have actually seen, the early days of both Ashok Kumar, Devika Rani. They've been through a lot. And they were also telling me that, in those days, men were men and women were women. It was a different kind of a world. And we were discussing that they looked good. They were, if you were handsome, you could be like extremely handsome, not this kind of cosmetic. If you were beautiful, you were like gorgeous, actually really gorgeous, as Devika was. And Himanshu also, extremely good looking, as was Svetoslav. A lot of the men in her life are very, very good looking, and naturally so. So I think this also adds to the appeal of that period, because we feel that they were somehow more natural, but their lives were not easy, because this was early Indian cinema. There was nothing that they could follow. Right now, the kids who come in, they have a track. They can follow a particular track, and they can go for it. But Devika and Himanshu really had to struggle to set up Bombay Talkies, because they had nothing to go by. Everything was being invented as they went along.
Yeah. One interesting question is about the cover of the book, which has the painting of Mautishi. So any comments on that? It's a phenomenal cover.
It was a real coincidence, because I always wanted to call this book The Longest Case, and everybody has a point of view about it, because it's well, why did you call it this? You should have said the life and times of Devika Rani was enough. But I said, one, it sort of evokes the kind of passion with which they made a cinema. The longest case. It was like they were not willing to give up. They would hang on and do it. And of course, she is known for The Longest Case, and was for a long time. It was also a very modern time. As you know, in Indian cinema, for so many years, people were not allowed to kiss. And this was in 1933. And she's kissing with a great passion. So I think that was also very important for me, to show her as a very modern and evolved woman, who was not fearful of showing her emotions anyway, on screen or even off screen. So it was a point. And Mautishi, it was so surprising when I wrote the play. There was an exhibition of, I wrote a play also in Devika, by the way, which did very well and got quite a few standing ovations everywhere it ran in India. Lilette had done the production. Is that Mautishi had done this particular painting. And when I saw it, I told my publisher, I said, my God, I can't believe it. It is the same kiss, which is in Karma. And Mautishi done such a lovely, let's just put it on the cover. And then she was kind enough, and the people who have the copyright were kind enough to give it to us. So that's how it happened.
Yeah. The person who asked this question, her name merely shows as Culture Speak. So I don't know who it is, but she was the one who, and there was another question about including the letters, etc. Instead of leaving them in the appendix. I think you have already explained, why you have done that. So and that's why I think the lives of actors of an earlier generation are so complex, and particularly women actors.
I think Devika's is more complex than others, because she did not show any of this to the world.
And also she was managing a studio.
She was, no, not only that, the abuse, the kind of physical domestic abuse. And I think this point needs to be highlighted today as well, because, we have a lot of cases of domestic abuse which take place, especially even during COVID and otherwise, and so on. So here was this very high profile actress who suffered, but she suffered in silence, and she managed to maintain her dignity, and she managed somehow or the other to turn the tables on her husband. I'm not recommending that as a path, but I'm just saying that this is something which we need to acknowledge. And it gives a lot of courage to women that, you can come out and talk about it, because other well-known women have also suffered the same. So I think that was very important, and nobody knew about it till I found these letters. This was truly a shocking fact for a lot of people, that somebody as gorgeous as her, as coming from a lineage like hers, and could still be a victim of domestic abuse.
What a life. And thank you so much for bringing out it with such passion and with such sincerity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And,
Kishwar.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you,
you.
Satya, and thank you, Kishwar, once again. Wonderful
Thank
session, extremely engaging. And to know, Devika Rani's life is also to know, as Satya said in the beginning, the history of, Hindi cinema, at least one chapter of it, and not necessarily the most, what should I say, pleasant chapter of it. Thank you so much for bringing this wonderful episode to us. Thank you so
Please
much.
do read the book.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.